Hello and welcome to Unacademy, a one stop destination for the English medium civil services aspirants. A very good morning and welcome to the daily Hindu news analysis. Let's begin today's discussion by first looking at the topics that we are going to discuss. From the Delhi edition of the Hindu, I have chosen 9 important articles for a detailed and comprehensive analysis so that you don't have to go back and read the newspaper again. So let's break down all these topics one by one. But before we start, I have a very important announcement for you. We have seen that most of the UPSC civil services aspirants they face the biggest challenge when it comes to preparing for current affairs. They're not sure how to read newspapers, how to make notes from current affairs, and how to link current affairs topics with the static portion of their syllabus. So, to help out these students, Unacademy is launching India's biggest free current affairs initiative. Starting from the 26th of July, every Saturday and Sunday from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m., we will be providing you concise monthly current affairs coverage across subjects by our top educators. These classes would be exclusively held on the Unacademy Platinum platform, which provides an almost offline like experience in the online format because this provides for better two-way communication between the educator and the student. Your cameras will be on and the teachers get to monitor you, hold you accountable, and provide for better communication, better doubt resolution in the class itself. In these sessions, we will cover current affairs from multiple sources from the Hindu, Indian Express, and various other relevant newspapers and magazines, along with plenty of practice questions. So, do ensure you enroll for this free program. And tomorrow, we are happy to launch the first session, a strategy session under this initiative, where I will be taking up how to prepare for current affairs, how to make use of this monthly current affairs program that we are launching from this Saturday. So please join me tomorrow, 24th of July at 7 p.m. The link for this session is provided in the video description. I will break down how this monthly current affairs course will help you in your current affairs preparation. I'll give you some strategy and inputs as well regarding reading newspapers, which articles to select, how to connect that with your static portion, and we'll also look at some PYQs based on current affairs. So join me tomorrow to attend this session live, and the link is provided in the video description. Now, if you want the PDF of this class, please scan the QR code on your screen. And after the session, I'll be sharing the PDF over here. So let's get started and look at the first article. Let's look at this column written by Nirupama Rao, former Foreign Secretary of India. This article on page number 8 talks about the latest conflict that has emerged between India and China. So, generally, whenever we talk about India China tensions, we talk about the India China competition that takes place in the Indian Ocean and across the Indo Pacific. We often talk about the border disputes with regard to the disputed Himalayan border. But India China are now getting caught in a new diplomatic tension, which is defined by a cultural narrative over Buddhism. Buddhism is something that binds India and China together. And today we are at crossroads because of the succession plan which is underway as far as Tibetan Buddhist politics is concerned. Recently, the spiritual religious figurehead of Tibetan Buddhists, Dalai Lama, has announced that his successor, his reincarnation, would be chosen by his own trust, which has been set up, the Gaden Fodrang Trust, that is based out of India. And his reincarnation, who would be chosen as the next successor, would be someone outside of China, who's born outside of China. So, this statement has already triggered China, as China is very sensitive about any matter related to Tibet and Tibet's Buddhist politics. China has always tried controlling the narrative of the succession in Tibetan Buddhist politics. Ever since China annexed Tibet in 1950 and crushed the Tibetan Buddhist uprising in 1959, it has always interfered with Tibetan Buddhist politics. It has even delegitimize the Dalai Lama and his followers, and treats them as anti national elements. So in 1959, when the Tibetan uprising was crushed by China, the young Dalai Lama and his followers, they fled to India seeking asylum, and the then Indian government under Prime Minister Nehru provided refuge to these Tibetan Buddhist refugees. So India took in the Tibetan refugees and the Dalai Lama, settled them across the country. At Dharamshala in Himachal Pradesh, a Tibetan refugee camp was set up, and we even allowed a parallel Tibetan government to be set up, the Central Tibetan Administration, which functions even today from Dharamshala as a parallel Tibetan administration. Tibetan refugee camps were set up at Kushalnagar near Madikeri in Karnataka as well. So close to 1 lakh Tibetan refugees have been accommodated in India, including the Dalai Lama, and India has provided a political and spiritual seat for Tibetan politics to play out in our country. So this has always instigated China. China has always seen this role of India in protecting Tibetan Buddhist refugees and the Dalai Lama and allowing them to run a parallel government. China has seen this as India's interference, as India's meddling in the internal matters of China. So this has always been a very delicate and sensitive issue. Now that the Dalai Lama has announced that his successor would be someone outside of China, would be chosen by the Gaden Phodrang Trust by following ancient Tibetan Buddhist tradition and rituals. Now, China has been countering this. China has already said that the future Dalai Lama would be chosen essentially by Beijing. In fact, China has already played a role in this regard. It has been meddling with the Buddhist monasteries in Tibet, trying to swing some of the Buddhist leaders in favor of the communist regime. So, this again highlights how China tries to not just exercise its territorial control, but it has been trying to control the narrative as well. Today, Buddhist refugees from Tibet are spread around the world, from US to Europe and other parts of the world. They even get a lot of support from Western governments for the cause of liberation of Tibet from Chinese occupation. So, this issue remains at the heart of India China tensions even today. And now, with the succession process being initiated, it has acquired a new urgency in that regard. Now, this is where you need to learn that Buddhism, which has been this close cultural link between India and China, today has become the center of geopolitical attention between the two countries. India has been the birthplace of Buddhism, the land where Lord Buddha attained enlightenment, the land where this religion took root and spread across Asia. And today, there are multiple Asian countries where Buddhism is very popular. In fact, some countries are Buddhist majority nations. To take Bhutan, for example, Myanmar, Sri Lanka, then move towards Southeast and East Asia, from Japan, South Korea to China itself, to Thailand, Vietnam, uh, all the way till Indonesia, Malaysia. Across this region, you have a very strong Buddhist presence and influence. So China has been trying to snatch this soft power asset of India, and it has been trying to upend India's role in pushing its Buddhist diplomacy. It's not just about Tibetan Buddhist politics and the Dalai Lama. India has been trying to leverage Buddhism in its diplomacy as a soft power strategy. Recently, we have even launched an initiative called the Buddhist Circuit Initiative. Over the last decade, under the Buddhist Circuit Initiative, India has been trying to improve the tourist infrastructure across the Buddhist pilgrimage sites, such as Bodh Gaya in Bihar, Sarnath, Kushinagar. We have been creating better airports, better hotels, and better amenities for the tourists to attract pilgrims from across the world, to push India's soft power Buddhist image and form close cultural links for geopolitical gains. But China has already taken a march over India in this regard. China has been trying to position itself as someone who controls the Buddhist diplomatic narrative. Even before India could get started with the Buddhist Circuit Initiative, China has been leveraging Buddhism from a very long time. It goes all the way back to the Panchashil doctrine that China was pushing, not just with India, but with other partners as well. China has positioned itself as a Buddhist leader, and this allows China to control the Tibetan narrative while pushing its own soft power image. China has very carefully cultivated this image. In fact, this is very evident in countries like Nepal, where you have Lumbini, the birthplace of Lord Gautam Buddha. And Nepal is also home to a significant portion of Tibetan refugees, right, who fled from Tibet in 1959. So China keeps a very close watch on Tibetan Buddhist politics, be it in India, be it in Nepal, and in Tibet itself. It keeps a very close watch on the developments in Tibetan politics and tries to control the entire developments. So this has been a fight for identity, essentially, with the Tibetan Buddhists fighting for liberation and their identity. China trying to stifle this, trying to control that narrative, to enforce that nationalist narrative and create a nationalistic identity. So in Nepal, India was very keen to develop the birthplace of Lord Buddha, and we were looking for a cultural initiative with Nepal at Lumbini. But China managed to overtake India, and China made big investments in the reconstruction and revival projects at Lumbini. That again tells you how China is extremely involved and proactive to leverage Buddhist diplomacy in its geopolitical outreach. It wants to rebrand itself and, in the process, control the narrative in Tibet and the politics in Tibet. That's why it doesn't recognize the Dalai Lama as a legitimate leader of the Tibetan Buddhist politics. Now, China is looking to counter the succession plan, and China says it will decide the reincarnation process based on historical tradition and rituals. So, essentially, what is going to happen is that there will be two Dalai Lamas for sure in the coming days. One appointed by the current Dalai Lama as his legitimate successor, and the other appointed by China. So, the presence of two Dalai Lamas will definitely create a bigger legitimacy crisis. It will create a legitimacy crisis as to which Dalai Lama is legitimate. So, followers of Dalai Lama and the Tibetan refugees outside of China, in India and around the world, they will definitely back the successor chosen by the current Dalai Lama. Whereas within Tibet and in areas where China is able to exercise its control and influence, they will back China appointed successor. So this could end up splitting Tibetan politics itself. China is quite adept at doing that. Over the decades, China has been actively controlling Buddhist monasteries in Tibet, especially at the local level, at the provincial and county level. China has been engaging with the Buddhist leaders, inviting them to Beijing for various government conferences and gatherings, and slowly influencing them to shift their loyalty towards the Chinese state, the People's Republic of China. This explains why China meddles in India's Tawang in Arunachal Pradesh, because Tawang is home to a very important Buddhist monastery, the Gelugpu Buddhist monastery, which plays an important role in Tibetan Buddhist politics. China wants to control that narrative, and China claims Tawang primarily on this basis that the monastery in Tawang has been historically tied with Tibetan politics. This claim is completely unsubstantiated. There is no basis for historical claims in international law, and yet China blatantly marches ahead and claims Tawang and questions India's sovereignty, not just over Tawang but over the entire state of Arunachal Pradesh. So whatever happens with regard to Tibet, with regard to the succession plan of Dalai Lama, will in turn influence the India-China relations and India-China tensions as well. The writer correctly points out that currently the biggest tension between India and China is not happening in the seas and the oceans. It's not happening across the physical border in the Himalayas, but it's over the spiritual diplomatic fight over who would be the next Dalai Lama and who gets to control the succession plan. If India is able to influence these events, it will give India a unique leverage. Usually, India has not tried to leverage the presence of the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan refugees in our country. Even the presence of the Tibetan administration, the parallel Tibetan government in exile, we haven't often leveraged this against China to poke China. But now India is showing that intent, and India is more actively engaged in backing the position of the current Dalai Lama. In fact, the government of India has been very vocal about this. Union Minister Kiran Riju has clearly said that India backs the current Dalai Lama and we respect the policy of religious neutrality. India has said we should not politicize spiritual matters and religious matters. But this messaging from India clearly has a deeper connotation, because the succession of the Dalai Lama is not just a spiritual matter anymore. It has clearly acquired a geopolitical overtone. So if India were to be able to get enough support for the successor appointed by the current Dalai Lama, this would definitely anger China and create a leverage for India to meddle in China's internal matters. It would give some leverage for India to influence developments in Tibet. And that is something which could escalate the tensions as well. And the writer is warning both the countries to ensure this doesn't turn into a ugly contest across the Himalayas. India should be more cautious and prepared for any escalation from the Chinese side. But the writer backs India's position to support the current Dalai Lama and the current succession plan which is being put in place. So this is what we take away from this important article. It essentially lets you know how China is obsessed with controlling Tibetan politics. And the matter of succession of the Dalai Lama is not just a spiritual matter, but clearly it is a geopolitical issue right now. So please take up a practice question based on this. Examine how India and China have been competing for control over defining the diplomatic cultural narrative of Buddhism. So, as promised, we will discuss the answer writing approach for the first question every time. So, in this question, what you can do is in the introduction, you can talk about the ancient historical context in which Buddhism was born, how it took root in India and branched out across Asia. Because right in the introduction, make a point that India is the birthplace of Buddhism, not China, not Tibet, no other place. It is India, the Indian subcontinent, the great Indian civilization, which is the birthplace of Buddhism. So make that very, very clear that if at all someone has to claim ownership over promoting Buddhist diplomacy, it's only India which has that original right. So establish that point very clearly in the introduction, and then in the body, you can talk about Tibetan politics, the recent developments surrounding the succession plan of the Dalai Lama, how China is interfering, what is India's position. Then also talk about leveraging Buddhism in soft power diplomacy. Here you can discuss India's Buddhist Circuit initiative and explain how China is trying to compete here as well, trying to take away this narrative from India. So present these two arguments clearly with the examples that I've discussed. And in the conclusion, end your answer by pointing out that Buddhist diplomacy is no longer just about soft power projection. It has clearly acquired geopolitical tones. It could become a source of tensions, fresh tensions between India and China. So try to point out that China could even escalate the matter with India, leading to greater tensions with India, and essentially try to bring out the point that the succession plan of the Dalai Lama could have a serious implications for India-China relationship. So try to present that in the conclusion and point out that India should leverage the issue. India should take ownership of not just promoting Buddhism as a diplomatic initiative, but also to support and back the succession plan of the Dalai Lama. To take that position favoring the government of India while striking a note of caution, a warning that we should be prepared for escalation from China. So this would make for a good structured answer. Now let's look at the next topic. A very interesting topic, the topic of work from home. In fact, the UPSC has already asked a mains question on the topic of work from home in one of the previous mains exams. So, work from home has many advantages and a lot of disadvantages as well. Across the world, most workers, employees, they prefer the remote work option, right? Whenever studies and surveys are conducted, most workers and employees state that they prefer working from home because of all the advantages it provides them with. But at the same time, there are some disadvantages, challenges coming up for companies and organizations. And there is a shift that is taking place with regard to the corporate thinking, the managerial thinking with regard to work from home option. So let's break this down and understand this as a topic could be relevant for social issues and even for Indian economy. See, in the pre-COVID era, before the COVID-19 pandemic, remote work option was largely seen as a luxury, as a privilege. Usually, most organizations would never provide remote working option or work from home option. Most offices, factories, industries, right, across sectors would expect employees to come to office, report to work, and work from the site. This has been a traditional model in which the work culture has evolved over decades, over centuries. But there were some companies, the new age tech companies, especially in the services industry, because usually in manufacturing, work from home is not an option at all, right? For physical production of goods, workers have to be present. Work from home is something which is often seen at managerial level in the manufacturing sector, and in the services industry across the organization, it's something which can be provided as a employee benefit, as one of the work options for flexibility. Now, in the services industry, particularly in the tech industry, the startups, the IT companies, the culture of work from home was seen even before the pandemic. But it was only seen in few companies which were having some progressive HR policies. It was very limited, very restricted. Most traditional companies, they would still expect employees to come to office every day, right? For example, if you look at what Narayan Murthy says, right? You would expect employees to work 70 hours a week, and he means working from office, not working from home, right? I know many of you may not agree with it, but that has been the traditional mode of working, right? Because there are certain advantages to it, there are drawbacks to it as well. Now, the pandemic was the big disruptor. The pandemic caused a big disruption in the way in which labor was carried out, the way in which employees were treated by companies and organizations. The pandemic forced the companies to provide work from home option, pushing the world suddenly in a disruptive manner to adopt a new working style and a working norm. And today, it has been widely accepted. Everybody initially felt this could affect productivity, motivation, and the bonding within the teams. But as it turns out, many companies have done well. In fact, there have been incidents where productivity has actually gone up and employees get more flexibility, more time at hand, avoid wasting time in commuting and traffic. And they're able to spend that extra time with their family or relax for some time or spend some time on their health and hobbies. But at the same time, there are certain concerns and disadvantages which are coming up. Now, recently, Stanford University conducted a study on the impact of remote work culture to understand the pros and cons of it. During the study, workers from markets like North America and Europe, from the developed countries, when employees were asked the question, how many days per week would you prefer working from home? The average answer was around 1.7 days per week. This is what employees in developed markets are getting, which is roughly 1.5 to 2 days of work from home. But they would prefer this to increase to 2.5 to 3 days. This is the trend seen in developed industrialized markets. Then across Asia, it's a different story altogether. Because see, in Asia, work culture is completely different. Some even look at the work culture in Asian countries as toxic. In India, in Japan, in Singapore, in China, in South Korea, right across the APEC region, in Southeast East Asian markets, it is a norm for workers to put in hard work to show that they are hardworking employees and loyalists only by reporting to work, going to office almost every single day, clocking in 9 hours, 10 hours, 12 hours, and even working on weekends. So this has been a norm, a cultural norm of sorts in Asian economies. So obviously, the remote work culture is less appreciated. There is that fear element as well amongst employees that if you don't go to office enough, you don't show up enough, then you'll not be seen as a hardworking employee, right? Which is largely a misconception. So in Asian countries, the employees expect hardly 2 days of work from home, and they're able to get only around 1.1 days per week of remote work option. They're expecting 2 to 3 days. That's what employees want, but they're actually hardly getting 1.1 days per week, according to the study, right? So there is a big difference between the developed market and the Asian economies. In between, you have Africa and Latin America, the LATAM region and African markets. They come somewhere in between where employees are able to exercise 1.5 days of remote work per week. They also expect 2 to 3 days of remote work option. They're able to get around 1.5 days of remote work. So, this is the global pattern which has been seen. Now, the advantages from remote work is very, very clear. There are significant advantages, especially to the employees, to the workers. It adds flexibility to their work schedule. It saves tremendous amount of time in unnecessary travel and commute, saves some of their expenses as well. It allows them to use the extra time they get to spend on their personal growth, which is equally important, to focus on their mental peace, spend time with family, take few extra vacations, or focus on health, right? Focus on nutrition, ensure there is better work life balance. So there are tremendous benefits that accrues to employees because of remote work option. But as I said, companies are worried about the trend because they do have some concerns. While some organizations have been able to maintain productivity levels and motivation, in some organizations it has been seen that employees often tend to zone out. They often lose that sense of a team operating together. The team culture, right, gets broken when you're working as an individual contributor, right? When you're isolated from the rest of the team. And it takes a toll on productivity, on motivation, and as well as on the overall goals of the organization. So companies do have a legitimate, genuine concern in this regard that though work from home is sustainable at least for few days a week, right? But as a long term option, companies are hesitant, and there is a trend of calling back employees back to work. So it's been almost 5 years since the pandemic, and today many organizations have been slowly calling back the employees. But some employees are hesitant and they are even resisting it because this is the autonomy they have got and they don't want to let go of that autonomy. Today, those who are seeking jobs, they make it a condition to tell the potential employer that, look, I can come to office only these many days, or I don't want to come to office at all. I only want work from home option. So, complete new culture has been developing. But however, there are some serious concerns, not for the company, not for the managers, not for the economy, but for the employee themselves. This study by Stanford University has established that remote work has led to an adverse effect as well on the overall well being of employees. Because, first of all, it blurs the distinction between work and home. When you make your home the workplace, the clear distinctions get blurred. And as a result, many employees report working beyond the usual hours. Essentially, the work never ends. The companies will also have the expectation that now that you're at home, you have all the free time to work more. And this has been adding to the burden, blurring the lines between work and your personal time. And the overall isolation that employees face is contributing to increasing risk of mental health complications as well. Losing inspiration, losing motivation, losing focus. And it's taking a physical toll on employees as well because most people may not have the office ergonomics to work in the most appropriate manner, meaning they may not have the most comfortable chair, the best table, and other facilities which are needed in a workspace. And also, when you travel to work, when you work outside in an office setting, right, you tend to move your body more, and that movement is what helps you avoid the side effect of lethargy. But when people are working remotely, they may not have the right table, the right chair, the right sitting position. Many people work on their bed, right? There have been instances where employees have been sleeping and working as well, as in lying on the bed, lying on the sofa and working. And this affects their posture. Many young working age people today are reporting a backache and severe neck issues, issues with joints in their limbs and hands. And many of these cases are directly linked with the, the poor posture and poor ergonomics which are available at home. And this is seen as a direct consequence of the remote work culture. The physical health has been taking a toll, mental health has been taking a toll. The clear distinction between work and home is getting blurred. That is why there is a debate. So, what is the ideal mix? Should there be permanent work from home or permanent work from office? What do you think? What is your preference? Let me know in the comments. The experts and the writer, they suggest a hybrid model as the best way out. A hybrid model which provides at least 2 to 3 days per week of remote work option and the rest 2 to 3 days in office. So such a flexible hybrid option is what is seen as best, and that's what many organizations are adopting as well. But however, when it comes to remote work option, there is a clear gender gap, a gender divide which is being seen. And that is something very interesting. It tells you something about our society as well. The study has shown men prefer work from home option mainly to relax, to pursue their hobbies, to have a downtime and use the extra time for going to the gym, for playing sports, etc. Whereas women who have a greater preference for work from home compared to men and women, women clearly have expressed a greater preference. According to the study, men prefer maybe around 2 days of work from home on an average per week, whereas women prefer 4 to 5 days of work from home if possible. The reason why there is a greater preference is not that women have been suddenly empowered. No, this is a result of patriarchy in the society. It's a result of women's role as the caregiver in the household. Before the pandemic, women were struggling to juggle these roles of cooking at home, doing all the chores at home, taking care of the family, the kids, and pursuing a paid job. This burden would never be shared by the men of the household in general. So that's the reason why women prefer the remote work option, as it gives them flexibility, not to relax, not to chill, not to pursue hobbies or rest, but essentially to divide the time between caregiving and their professional work. This again is a clear reflection of the prevalent gender based roles in our society. How women are expected to be caregivers all the time. Women are expected, even forced by families, to cook, to look after families, do the household chores, while these responsibilities are not placed on men in the society. So, this is where I think the HR, human resources professionals, right, who guide these policies of the employers, they have to keep in mind the gender based requirement as well. Maybe provide more flexibility for women workers and lesser flexibility for men. Something of that sort should be incorporated into the policies of the organizations. So let me know what you think and what you prefer is the right option. And please take up this practice question for your answer writing practice. Now, moving on to the next article, we have a very, very important topic on page number 10, a detailed article on India's nuclear program, the power program, the civilian nuclear program of India. What are the future ambitious plans of India? And this allows us to explore the history of our nuclear program as well and talk about the present goals that the government has been laying out. See, in this year's budget, the government of India has laid down a very ambitious plan for the nuclear sector. A nuclear energy mission has been rolled out by the government of India, and the goal is to have 100 gigawatts of installed capacity from nuclear energy in the coming decades. Currently, the installed capacity is approximately 8 gigawatts. So, we would like to increase this exponentially in the coming years as India pursues its goal of becoming a Viksit Bharat by 2047. So, if you look at India's energy plans and India's energy basket and how we are looking to source our energy, there is significant allocation given for nuclear power because it is scalable, it is clean, seen as a form of clean renewable energy as a good alternative to fossil fuels that can help India meet its climate action targets as well. But however, if India has to truly achieve the goal of becoming a developed nation with significant investments in nuclear energy, and if India has to meet its climate target of achieving net zero emissions by 2070, this is another important goal that India has declared. That by 2070, we will achieve the net zero emissions target. So, to achieve these goals and targets, India has to do much more in the nuclear energy space. So, this is where we need to talk about the brief history of India's nuclear program, how India has progressed over the years, what challenges are present, what policy changes are required to help India achieve this ambitious target. Now, India became one of the first countries in Asia to put up a nuclear research reactor. The year was 1954 when India had rolled out its nuclear ambition. The architect of India's nuclear program, Homi Jahangir Baba, was appealing to then Prime Minister Nehru to grant approval not just for a civilian nuclear program but as well as a nuclear weapons program. Given India's diplomatic global commitments, India at that point had decided against pursuing nuclear weapons as India believed in a nuclear uh, free world, and we believed firmly in disarmament and non-proliferation. But India's civilian program would take off. And by 1956, India would have the first research reactor in Asia, which is the Apsara, which was basically a Canadian research reactor that was loaned out to India with the backing and support of United States. By 1963-64, India had already made rapid advances in nuclear research, and a functional reactor had been put in place, which marked the rollout of India's civilian nuclear program. But following the India China War of 1962 and China developing and testing nuclear weapons in the 60s, India would change its path and proactively it started pursuing nuclear weapons from the early 1960s itself. When the global community tried to curb the further spread of nuclear weapons by bringing out non-proliferation treaty in 1967-68, India firmly rejected the treaty. Prime Minister Indira Gandhi took a clear stand against the NPT as it would exclude any country from developing nuclear weapons if they are not part of the P5. If you look at the non-proliferation treaty, it allows only those countries which already possessed nuclear weapons by 1967 to continue holding on to their nuclear arsenal and even further developing it, which meant only the P5 countries, the five permanent members of UN Security Council, that is US, USSR, China, UK, and France, they could retain and further develop and expand their nuclear arsenal. But others will have to permanently give up their pursuit. And if they already have started, they will have to shut down their nuclear weapons program. So this treaty was blatantly discriminatory. So India outright rejected the treaty as India wanted to retain the option of building nuclear weapons to deter a nuclear China. It was a strategic necessity for India, strategic requirement. So India essentially walked out of NPT. Later, the Western countries even set up an export control regime, the Nuclear Suppliers Group, to restrict the availability of nuclear material for countries like India. So India managed to evade the international pressure, the eventual sanctions which came on India, and we went on building and pursuing our weapons and civilian programs simultaneously. In 1974, India carried out the first nuclear test under Operation Smiling Buddha, and then Prime Minister labeled it as a peaceful nuclear explosion. Was an oxymoron, but it also indicated that India had no intention to trigger an arms race or to be a hostile or threat to others. Our nuclear test, the weapons test in 1974, and the very pursuit of nuclear weapons of India was more of a deterrent to deter India's imminent threats, such as China. Following this, India would face severe sanctions and international pressure as India was developing nuclear weapons as a rogue state outside of NPT. The United States, in particular, would actively try to target India's nuclear and space program. It would even make attempts to derail India's pursuit of nuclear and space technology. But India managed to overcome this pressure, focus on its indigenous program, and by 1998, India successfully tested its nuclear weapons again at Pokhran under Operation Shakti under Prime Minister Vajpayee, heralding India's entry as a nuclear weapon state. And since then, India has cemented its position, right? While we have parallelly built our civilian power program, but we had to deal with the impact of sanctions at least until early 2000s. The economic technological sanctions that were brought on India. But in 2005, there was a big breakthrough, a major diplomatic turnaround when India US managed to strike the civil nuclear deal under Prime Minister Manmohan Singh. India had a new opening with the United States. Our strategic defense and military relations were booming with the US after the 2001 9/11 attacks. And India built upon the strategic partnership as US also needed India to counter China. US needed India for counterterrorism. India also needed US for the very same reasons. Plus, our economic ties were booming. So, this civil nuclear agreement that was worked out, the 123 agreement, would completely transform the very image and face of India's nuclear program. With the American recognition and acknowledgement, India was now seen as a responsible nuclear power with a clean track record because there had never been any major nuclear accidents or any leakage or proliferation of nuclear secrets from India, unlike Pakistan. Pakistan had been responsible for leaking nuclear secrets to rogue countries like North Korea, Libya, and Iran, whereas India had maintained a perfect track record and that established the integrity of our nuclear program. So now that India got recognition as a responsible nuclear power, many other countries reached out to India and we ended up signing civil nuclear deals with them. For example, France, later Japan, Australia, Canada, and other key countries like Kazakhstan, Namibia, which could be potential suppliers of uranium to India. We have signed multiple civil nuclear agreements, and we are even seeking membership to Nuclear Suppliers Group because the United States and other NSG members granted an exemption to India. Because to join Nuclear Suppliers Group, the condition is that you must sign NPT. But India has made it clear we will never ever sign NPT. So India has been given an exemption to join NSG without signing NPT. Right now, all the members of NSG are supporting India's entry. 47 out of 48 members are backing India's entry. But China is deliberately blocking India's entry into the nuclear suppliers group. So, this is where our progress stands today. But the rest of the world is happy to engage and work with India in the nuclear domain. But these agreements, the deals that we have signed, will not take full effect unless and until there are few hurdles which are, cleared out of the way. Russia has seen some success in this regard. Russia, which has always been a backer of our nuclear and space program, it has taken up the Kudankulam nuclear power plant project in coastal Tamil Nadu. It even predates India's nuclear weapons test. Right, the project was pushed in 1980s, and Russia got an exemption from Nuclear Suppliers Group to supply nuclear material and reactors to India by establishing that this was a civilian project. And since then, Russia has been playing this key role in setting up nuclear reactors in Tamil Nadu. India has an indigenous program which has matured and it has come off its age right now. We have put in place a three-stage nuclear program, with the first stage focusing on uranium, which is available in India, which we can procure from other partners as well. The second stage would be powered by the byproduct of the first stage, which is plutonium, along with the uranium. And the third and final stage would be primarily powered by thorium, as India has massive, massive reserves of thorium in the monzite sands of Kerala. This three stage program of India was laid down in the 1950s and 60s itself under the leadership of Homi Jahangir Baba. Now, India has pioneered the first and second stage. We have just rolled out the second stage recently. In the first stage, if you look at the pressurized heavy water reactors, they actually use natural uranium as the fuel, not even enriched uranium. The low pressurized water reactors, they make use of low enriched uranium that we have often procured from US, France, and other countries in the past. So what you can learn is that there are few indigenous reactors which have proven their credibility, like the pressurized heavy water reactors. Today, many of them are operational, which are set up by the Nuclear Power Corporation of India Limited. We started out with our initial project at Tarapur in Rajasthan, with active involvement of BARC and Department of Atomic Energy. But now India has scaled these reactors. They are operating across the country from Narora in Uttar Pradesh to Kaiga in Karnataka to many other locations. These pressurized heavy water reactors are able to generate clean energy, and we are now transitioning into these fast breeder reactors, initiating the second stage of our program. And our eventual ambition is to reach the third stage where we can make use of the thorium reserves that we have. Now, there are certain hurdles and challenges India is facing. The biggest challenge is the lack of uranium that's available in the country. And we also need more efficient reactors. We need some sort of foreign support. We need foreign companies, even private companies, to get in and play a role in the nuclear energy sector. Because if you look at our climate commitments, nuclear energy is definitely a clean energy, right? It may not be the same as solar, wind, biomass, which is clearly seen as renewable. But nuclear energy definitely provides a solution to transition away from fossil fuels. As I said, India has a very ambitious goal to become a net zero emission economy by 2070. Under Paris Agreement, we have very ambitious targets to increase our renewable energy capacity to 500 gigawatts by the end of the decade and ensure 50% of our energy is coming from clean renewable sources. And as we discussed recently, India has already met the target. Today, we have 50% installed capacity. 50% of our power installed capacity is coming from clean renewable sources. Now, going forward, for India to sustain this momentum and eventually to reach the status of a developed nation in another 20 odd years, we will need to scale up power production. And if India exponentially increases power production, most likely we will again end up relying on thermal power, on coal based, fossil fuel based power, as that is still the easiest and the cheapest to generate electricity. Right? To transition into a developed nation, right? There are many examples around the world. It is very evident, very clear that a transition to a developed country will require tremendous amounts of energy, electricity. Where will India bring uh, that supply? The demand is going to surge in the coming decades, right? How will India match that particular demand? Where will we, plug in that energy gap? So most likely, India will be pushed to rely on thermal power again, because solar, wind, these forms of energy, they are intermittent. They're not very reliable all the time. You need very good efficient battery storage technology to be able to provide for uninterrupted power supply. That is where nuclear energy comes in. So we can't just rely on the indigenous reactors we have, and we can't just allow the sector to be dominated by the public sector. As of now, nuclear sector is closed for private participation, and only public sector companies like NPCIL are allowed to operate. So this is where the budget opens a new possibility with small modular reactors. The government is now focusing on smaller modular size reactors, which can be scaled easily, set up in a very short span of time. And for this, we need larger private participation and as well as foreign participation as well. But however, there are a couple of legal and regulatory problems and issues that need to be solved. For example, the Atomic Energy Act of 1962. This law needs to be amended. According to Atomic Energy Act 1962, activities in nuclear sector has been restricted to the public domain. Private participation is not allowed. This is one reason why foreign nuclear companies could not set up nuclear reactors in India despite signing civil nuclear agreements. The other legal hurdle is the civil liability for nuclear Damages Act 2010. After India signed the IAEA safeguards and the additional protocol to it, we became fully compliant with IAEA standards after we signed the nuclear deal with United States. This was part of the commitment that we had made under the agreement that US would assist India in installing nuclear plants in the country, in helping India to get membership of export control regimes like Nuclear Suppliers Group. In return, India will accept IAEA safeguards. So we signed the safeguards agreement and the additional protocol, and we separated our civilian and military nuclear facilities. We opened up the civilian facilities for inspection by IAEA inspectors to establish that we are following the global safety and security standards. But under the IAEA Safeguards Agreement, it's essential to bring in a nuclear liability legislation in order to ensure that the manufacturer of a nuclear reactor is not held liable beyond a certain limit in case there is a nuclear accident or a tragedy. The global standard is that the liability, the compensation to be paid by the operator of a plant, by the manufacturer of the nuclear reactor, is limited, it's capped at a certain number. Any compensation beyond that will be borne by the respective governments. This is the global standard which has been set up by IAEA, right? So this makes the business of nuclear energy more viable. It will encourage private sector to participate more because if they are open to unlimited liability, why will private companies design and manufacture nuclear reactors if they know that there is a risk in the future that they might be opened up for unlimited liability in case of an accident, right? So this is the global standard. But in India, the bill which was pushed in the parliament, right, it was amended, and the law that we have eventually enacted, the Civil Liability for Nuclear Damages Act, it goes beyond the liability cap that has been set by IAEA standards. In case of the Indian liability law, there is an option for the victims of a nuclear accident to take legal recourse even against the original equipment manufacturer and the operator of the plant. So even the companies which design the reactors and manufacture them can be held accountable for unlimited liability, seeking more and more compensation. So this is seen to be against the global standards, and that's why many foreign companies are not keen to come to India and set up reactors in India. Now, these are the two laws which India is considering to amend. One, the Atomic Energy Act to pave the way for more private participation and to incentivize the foreign companies to step into the Indian market by amending the Civil Liability Act to bring it in line with global standards by limiting the liability. The legal recourse option would be taken away, or some sort of cap would be placed on the compensation that is essentially to be paid by the original equipment manufacturer. Apart from this, India will also have to refine its overall tariff policy and regulatory policy because electricity generated from nuclear sources as of now tends to be costlier compared to coal based power. So, how do we make it more financially viable with the appropriate tariff policy? If disputes come up in electricity pricing, who will handle those disputes? Right now, the electricity disputes, the tariff disputes are handled by a separate tribunal. So, these regulatory issues and legal issues have to be sorted out. Then, the nuclear sector is now regulated by the Atomic Energy Regulatory Board, which is under the Department of Atomic Energy. But it has no autonomy, it is not independent. The same organization which is responsible for promoting atomic research and nuclear research is responsible for regulating the sector as well. So that's a clear vested interest. There's a conflict of interest. So the government should consider giving complete independence and autonomy to the regulator or creating a new regulatory body, especially if we are considering opening up the sector for private participation and foreign participation, because there can't be a compromise on safety and security. This is something which should be a topmost priority. So India will have to sort out all these issues, provide more incentives as well, because investing in nuclear sector is not cheap. Studies have shown that per megawatt of energy generated in nuclear plants, investment required is $2 million. Whereas in a thermal power to generate megawatt of energy, it is just $1 million. So the difference is like 100%. So that's one more reason why there is hesitation from private companies to get into the nuclear sector. So India will have to create a favorable legal, policy, and regulatory environment to attract and incentivize the private players, the big private corporations, to focus on small modular reactors to solve the future energy problem of India. Now, let's look at the remaining small articles in the paper. On page 6, there's an article referring to one of the horrific social evils that has been practiced in Indian society, the Devadasi system. Under the Devadasi system, girls from lower classes or lower sections of the society, they would be given away to temples, almost like a donation. Devadasi itself translates to servant of the god. They would be donated off to temples by the families. It was largely a social custom which had been created since many centuries. Right? This system was prevalent many centuries ago, and it has remained prevalent and continues to have an impact today on women, particularly in southern parts of India. So, under the system, the girl child who is donated to the temple would be expected to learn some temple rituals, play a role in maintenance of the temple as well, right? And along with that, the girl child would be expected to learn dance and was seen as a artist who could perform to the temple audience. And not just that, these Devadasis would be expected to serve the temple officials, essentially the upper caste, the landlords, the feudal landlords, including the temple priests from the upper caste. They misused and exploited this system to extract sexual services as well from the Devadasis, turning them effectively into prostitutes. They would even be referred to as temple prostitutes. Historically, especially between 6th to 14th century, there are records that Devadasis had a much better social standing because the kings were the patrons. Under the king's patronage, Devadasis were widely respected. They would be very affluent, and they were seen as not just the protectors of the temple and the deity, but they would also be seen as purveyors of art. As they were all artists, they were seen as protectors of the art form, and they would be very well treated, seen with a lot of respect, as they were under the patronage of the kings. But with the rise of colonial rule and with the fall of the kingdoms and the princely states, Devadasis were completely left to be abused by the upper caste and the feudal landlords. And essentially, it became a system of brutal abuse, including sexual exploitation of these women. Kids born to them would be seen as fatherless. They would be abused and mistreated, and they wouldn't enjoy any of the rights, including rights over property and inheritance. This system has continued in modern times as well in parts of Karnataka, Andhra Pradesh, Tamil Nadu, etc., Maharashtra as well. And now it stands banned and prohibited in post independent India. Across states, the Devadasi system is clearly prohibited as a social evil. In Karnataka, there is a law that was passed in the 1980s, which prohibited the Devadasi practice. Now, the Karnataka government is planning to upgrade this law to bring out a new legislation which will accord more rights to Devadasis and their kids. It will allow paternity DNA testing to determine who's the father of these kids who are born to Devadasis, and recognizes their property and inheritance rights as well. So, this provides for further upliftment of the Devadasi community. Next, on page 15, we have an article referring to the ongoing trade negotiations between India and United States. As you know, the US has threatened India with 26% tariffs under Trump's Liberation Day tariffs. Trump has often labeled India as a tariff abuser. He has targeted the trade surplus India maintains with the US, and he has been pushing and pressurizing India to take down the tariffs and increase market access for American companies, or else face the consequences of higher tariffs at 26%. Such high tariffs could destroy Indian exports to the US, which is such a critical market. US is always amongst the top two trading partners for India, a key export market for India, and especially our MSME sector, agriculture sector, automobiles, IT, all these industries, even pharma, they depend heavily on the US market. So with 26% tariffs, our exports could be decimated. They will become essentially, they'll become less competitive, right? They'll become expensive to be imported into the US. And this could have a serious impact on our export oriented sectors and industries. So right now, Trump has placed a deadline. Initially, deadline was 9th of July to work out a mini trade deal. And right now, the deadline has been pushed to the end of this month. So by 31st of July, if the deal is not finalized, according to Trump's threats, by August 1st, the 26% tariffs will kick in. And this is what traders and manufacturers in India are fearing. That's why the government of India is rushing to work out and finalize a trade deal. Recently, a team of Indian negotiators were in the US to work out the final contours of the deal. And according to reports, after submitting India's proposal, the negotiators have even left and come back. So now the ball is in the court of the US to work out the final contours of the deal. So in the next few days, we might see a big announcement on a India US mini trade deal. But there is also speculation that there are wide differences between India and US. For example, India is looking to protect key sectors like agriculture and automobiles. Because if we throw open our markets, American businesses could fully exploit sensitive sectors like agriculture, auto, pharma. We are even concerned about the IT sector as well. Then even other labor intensive industries. India is really worried about throwing open these sectors because any flood of American products is something that could destroy Indian domestic producers. They may not be able to compete with these products. So India is very keen to protect the farmers, the domestic auto industry, the MSME sector, which is primarily labor oriented, like engineering and automotive components, those industries, even pharma, IT, etc. This is where US is pushing India very hard, seeking more market access so American companies can tap into the Indian market. Right now, India does have higher tariffs against American exports to India. So if US gets a concession, right, and if the trade deal is worked out, then we need to look at the possible consequences for India. But India has made it clear that it's not going to compromise sensitive sectors. So if there is no trade deal, what will happen? Will 26% tariffs kick in, or will it further extend? And will US look for a bilateral trade agreement, which might be finalized by August or September? So right now, India-US trade relations is facing a grave risk because of the tariff wars that Donald Trump has unleashed. So there is this update in this article that the deadlock is continuing. We still haven't resolved the differences over agriculture, automobile sector, etc. So this is something we'll continue to track very closely. So if a trade deal is announced, we'll definitely discuss this separately in a later session. Now, coming to the prelims topics, let's take a quick look. In this article on page number 4, it has been reported that the government of Goa is going to approach the Supreme Court against the government of Karnataka with regard to the Mhadei river water dispute. So the Mhadei river takes birth in the Western Ghats in the Bhimgad Wildlife Sanctuary in the Belgavi or Belgaum district of Karnataka. This river, which is joined by other tributaries, flows down into Goa. It's a west flowing river which drains into Arabian Sea. And the drainage basin is spread across Karnataka, Goa, and even a small part of Maharashtra. Most of the drainage and catchment area is present in Goa. Next would be Karnataka and a very small portion in Maharashtra. These three are the riparian states of the Mahadai River, which becomes known as the Mandovi River once it enters Goa. It is joined by various tributaries like the Kalasa Nala, Banduri Nala, and the other tributaries across the Western Ghats. And it's on this river that the famous Dudhsagar waterfalls is also located. It also joins the Zuari River at the Mormugoa Bay as it eventually drains into the Arabian Sea. So, sharing of these waters has been a sensitive issue between the state governments of Karnataka and Goa, and even Maharashtra has entered into this legal battle. See, Karnataka proposed a major irrigation project, the Kalsa Banduri Nala project, to create these dams and barrages on the major tributaries of the Mhadei River at Kalsa and Banduri to divert the waters to supply drinking water and water for irrigation to the dry and parched areas in Karnataka. So districts like Gadag, Dharwad, and Belgavi, they they face arid, semi-arid conditions. So to ensure there is adequate supply of drinking water and water for irrigation, Karnataka government proposed this project way back in the 1980s. It was later taken up by the SM Krishna government, but immediately it was challenged by the then Chief Minister of Goa, Manohar Parrikar, who took the matter to the central government, saying that these barrages, if they are built by Karnataka in the Western Ghats at Kalsa and Banduri, it will basically disrupt the water flow into the Mandovi and limit the water availability for the lower riparian. So this matter was eventually taken up uh, by the center, and a tribunal was constituted as per the provisions of Article 262 of the Indian Constitution that deals with interstate river sharing disputes. The Mhadei Water Dispute Tribunal was constituted in 2010, and after 8 years, it delivered its award. So, according to the tribunal's verdict, Karnataka has been awarded with around 13 TMC feet of water, 1.3 TMC to Maharashtra, 24 TMC to Goa, Goa getting the highest allocation. But Goa was not happy with the award, and Goa has gone again on an appeal and approached the Supreme Court in 2019. It has filed a special leave petition challenging the tribunal's award, seeking higher allocation. Now, Karnataka and Maharashtra also have joined the legal battle, approaching the Supreme Court and thus dragging this water sharing dispute. So that is what you need to know about the Mahadai river sharing dispute. It remains a standing water dispute. Next, a big development in the field of defense. Indian Army has received the first batch of Apache helicopters. The Apache is one of the most lethal and advanced ground attack helicopters from the United States. It's already a backbone uh, of the US Armed Forces. India had signed a deal for Apache helicopters. We have received around 22 Apache helicopters for the Indian Air Force. They've already been deployed in the western sector and the eastern sector, facing Pakistan and China. Now, in a separate contract, we are procuring the Apache for the Indian Army, the Army's Aviation Corps. And the Apache is primarily known for its ground attack capabilities. It can fly very close to the surface of the ground, evade radar detection, and it has the ability to even breach into and penetrate into enemy airspace. It carries lethal firepower. It has a very advanced machine gun, can launch deadly rockets, including the Hellfire missiles, which can take out incoming battle tanks and infantry units on the ground. It can provide close battle support from the air for the infantry on the ground when a tank battle is going on or infantry raid is being carried out, or when intensive shelling is being carried out from the Indian side. Right, the Apache can provide that critical air support to the ground troops and ground forces, and it can be a game changer in the battlefield. It can decimate enemy battle tanks, artillery units, infantry units, and it's a much feared weapon platform. Its radar is highly sophisticated. It can even play the role of air defense. It can pick out hostile targets which are approaching, be it enemy fighter jets or helicopters or drones. It even is equipped with air to air missiles to perform this air defense role. So it's a multi role platform. It can not only provide that ground support to the troops from the air, it can engage in offensive ground operations and even play a role in air defense. And this is a game changer in the battlefield. Next, the United States has pulled out of UNESCO. Not for the first time, but this is the third time that US is pulling out of UNESCO. UNESCO is a specialized agency of the United Nations. The United Nations Educational, Scientific and Cultural Organization that was set up in 1945 after Second World War to promote peace and harmony between the countries by focusing on educational initiatives, cultural initiatives, and scientific initiatives. UNESCO is credited with some important programs such as the Man and Biosphere Program and as well as the World Heritage Site Program. It has been pioneering educational and scientific research as well. Today, it has 194 member states and 12 associate members, and it is headquartered in Paris and is seen as a key part of the functioning of the UN system. But the United States always had problems with UNESCO. The US argument is that UNESCO has been a platform for anti Israel propaganda. UNESCO has admitted Palestine as a member, though Palestine is not a recognized country. And this is something Israel has been worried about. And given how US backs Israel, the US has often taken a position that UNESCO is anti Israel and promotes anti Semitic propaganda. So, on this ground, the US had once quit UNESCO and later it had rejoined. But now, under Donald Trump, the US has quit UNESCO twice. First in 2018, during the first presidency of Trump, on the same grounds that UNESCO is anti Israel. And later, under Biden presidency, it had rejoined in 2023. It had rejoined the organization. But now that Trump is back in power, US has again decided to quit UNESCO. And this will affect the functioning of the organization, as US was one of the biggest donors, right? So if US will stop funding the organization, this could affect its activities as well. So in another couple of years, US will fully complete the exit. And this has essentially, raised questions about the very viability of UNESCO as an organization. And it also shows to what extent US goes to support and back Israel. Just because Israel's actions are called out at these platforms, United States takes up the issue and projects this as an anti-Semitic propaganda and rejects the recognition of Palestine. And this has been a matter of concern for the UN itself and for other members who support the creation of Palestine. Next, coming to the last topic on the supplementary page, right? The last supplementary page of the Hindu. Hindu carries this image. What you're seeing here is the Yarlung Sangpo River flowing across the Namcha Barwa. Now, this region is in the news and very significant for India because China has recently started the construction of the world's largest hydropower dam project, the Medog hydropower station. And this has raised deep concerns for India. According to the initial project design, it's been reported that in a 50-kilometer stretch, this river falls nearly by 2 kilometers in height, in altitude. And China plans to build a series of hydropower turbines to generate hydropower in this region. Now, the Yarlung Sangpo that takes birth in Tibet near Lake Manasarovar, near Mount Kailash, flows in a eastward direction and takes a sudden 180-degree turn, almost a U-turn. It's also called the U-bend at Namcha Barwa. The terrain here is perfectly conducive for hydropower plants to be set up. The altitude drops significantly. There is a steep slope gradient present, which is perfect for creating that hydropower potential and to set up hydropower dams. The Yarlung Sangpo crosses over into India and becomes known as the Brahmaputra, the mighty Brahmaputra, which later flows into Bangladesh as the Jamuna and merges with the Meghna river system to drain into Bay of Bengal. The Brahmaputra is joined by other rivers like Lohit, Dibang, and the others in Arunachal as it flows down, and it's a major lifeline for Northeast India, right? For drinking water, irrigation, industrial activities. Brahmaputra is a lifeline for both India and Bangladesh. Now, China has already built many dam projects on the Yarlung Sangpo. But the thing is, we don't have a water sharing treaty. China doesn't share hydrological data. It's not very transparent about its projects. India is worried that as lower riparian countries, India would be affected by how China plans to utilize these waters. And now, right at Namcha Barwa in the Medog County, China has proposed to build the world's largest dam, which is going to be larger even than the Three Gorges Dam. This mega project, multi-billion dollar project that China has started, the work has begun a couple of days ago. It has raised concerns for India because China is not very cooperative when it comes to these transboundary rivers. So this is what we learn from today's The Hindu newspaper. I hope you have understood all the key topics and liked the discussion. And if you benefited from the class, do press the like button, share your comments, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel. That is it. Thanks for watching.